Okay, today's presentation is around transforming your HR department into a profit center. It's a I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step guide on how to do that, and the presentation is geared towards CEOs and their leadership teams, but pretty much can apply to all types of organizations and different levels as well. So I'll start off with a simple equation. And that equation is that if you believe and you invest in HR or people, um, you will achieve extraordinary employee engagement, which will lead to extraordinary productivity, which will lead to a significant increase in revenue and profit. So that's the case that I guess I'm going to try to prove today. And hopefully by the end, we'll get a thumbs up that indeed is possible and is actually happening in many, many organizations. So I'm going to go through a 6-step process. I'm going to start with assessment, which is sort of taking stock of what HR looks like in an organization or your organization. We're going to talk about right people, right seats, which comes from Jim Collins, Good to Great. We're going to talk about how to do an HR plan. We're going to talk about KPIs or key performance indicators, benchmarking, and then best practices by function. So if we follow these steps in order, you will then again turn HR into a profit center. So let's get started. Just a little information about myself. I worked in corporate America for 12 years. The first half I was in operations management with Cigna and Prudential. And then the second half I worked in HR with Reliance, Insurance, and a couple other companies as well. I founded my company in 1995, and I left a corporate HR job, and so I've been in business for 29 years, running my own business. So I consider myself a business owner, entrepreneur, and thought leader. I've started several industry organizations, which I'll touch on. One is the HR Department of the Year Awards. The second is HREA, which is an association for HR executives. And the third is TALA, which is an association for talent acquisition leaders. I have written 2 books on leadership and HR, and I'm currently writing this 3rd book, and it should be published soon on the topic that we're talking about today. I've profitably run my HR staffing consulting firm. I've had revenues up to 10 million and 100 employees. So that's me. So I'm going to start off with a comment by Jim Collins. If any of you have read the book Good to Great, Jim Collins will say that good is the enemy of great. So what this case is today is geared towards how to build a great company through great HR and great people. I'm not going to focus on good today. I'm going to focus on great. And so if you've worked with companies or you consult with companies or you're in an HR function or will be, I'm giving you suggestions and tools to create a great company. And that's going to be the focus. And the question that I start off with is, are people an asset to you? We've heard the expression, people are my most important asset. I've probably heard that, at least 100 times. But when I sort of open the hood up and I look underneath and I talk to some employees or I talk to some leaders, that's not always the case. And so I'm trying to address you as an audience and make the case again that investing in people makes a lot of sense to build a great company. And the asset analogy is pretty simple. Why do we invest in assets? We expect them to grow. And by investing in people, we expect those people to grow and grow in the terms of increased productivity, engagement, leading to increased profitability for the company. This can be measured. I'm going to talk about that. And just a caution to leaders to not use that expression if they're not going to follow through on it. Because your employees are going to know that, and it's going to actually decrease trust in the company and in the leadership. All right, I'm going to show a short video of a guy by the name of Tony Valdez. He is the CEO of Children's Crisis Treatment Center. They are a nonprofit agency in Philadelphia. I interviewed Tony for my book, and I also, he won the HR Department of the Year award, and he's part of Vistage, which is a business owners group, and he's talking about his group and an exercise they did. So it's going to just take about a minute and a half to see this, and hopefully you can hear it and see it.
I'm going to give the simple answer first. The answer is yes. I'm going to talk first about an experience I had with in a CEO group that I belong to, where we were asked, and these are both nonprofit and for-profit CEOs, and there was a circle, and in the circle there was kind of a pie format, and there were 8 sections of that circle, and there was everything from financial profit, financial performance, human resources, culture. All those things were part of this pie, right? And they asked the 12 CEOs that were in the room all to make a line between each of the 8 items, and then put an arrow in the direction of which one influenced the others the most. And unanimously, without anybody knowing how everybody else filled it out, culture was the only item that always affected the other more. And everything else had a, 4 and 3, 3 and 4, whatever, but they were, the only one that went 7 and 0 was culture.
So Tony is probably one of at least 100 CEOs that I've met with and talked to for previous books and this book, who have the same view of HR as Tony did, which really says a lot coming from a leader. And I've talked to a lot of people that say that HR is definitely as important as every other function in the company, including sales, marketing, finance, and in some cases more important. So I've talked to some CEOs that say, hey, before I make any decisions about the business, I go to HR, I go to my HR leader, and we'll talk it through. So again, the case here is about building a great company. So great leaders and great CEOs, consider HR critical to the organization. So the point or the suggestion is that leaders need to be as intentional about HR as they are about any other function in the company. So, you have a lot of focus on sales in the company. You have a lot of focus on finance and financial. Well, the same amount of attention that goes into those functions would need to go into HR, assuming you want to build a great company. Now, there's nothing wrong with a good company, and there are plenty of good companies out there. But if you want to really be great and extraordinary, and you want to have extraordinary people, then the intention would need to be invested in. So I'm going to talk about a concept which kind of simplifies things for me anyway. And I'm going to talk about HR as offensive and defensive. And what I mean by that is, any great sports team, as you know, needs to have offense and defense. It's true of any sporting team. And the better the offense and the defense, the better the team. Well, the same thing applies to human resources. And I'll start with defense. So on the defensive side, which is really what most CEOs and leaders think about as HR, keep me out of trouble, make sure we're in compliance with all the laws, regs, state and federal, make sure our payroll and benefits is done right, keep employee records up to date. And that's pretty much what a lot of people think of HR as, a lot of leaders. However, the majority of HR services in great companies is offensive. And that's what we're really going to focus mostly on this morning. Offense includes things like strategic recruiting, which is different than recruiting admin, talent management activities, corporate culture, employee engagement, communications, technology in HR, compensation and benefit strategy, diversity, etc. So the mindset, again, in a lot of companies is that HR is an expense, and we want to keep those expenses down. And the argument here for great companies, which is in fact true, is that a strong offensive function is what will lead towards the greatness that we talked about. So let's start with HR assessment, which is the first item. So an HR assessment is really a benchmark. And it's a way to see how the company views HR, how effective they feel HR is. And it's kind of like a 360 on HR. And I'm just going to give you an example of how we do it in my company, but there's lots of different consultants that do assessments. This process is to be done on HR, not by HR. So this is basically a performance review of HR. And so the process, and usually it's the CEO that triggers the decision to do this, hopefully in conjunction with HR, and hopefully HR is interested in this information. Many companies are willing and open to doing that. Some aren't. So we start off with an interview of a cross-section of employees in the company. We typically interview the CEO. We interview one or more of the leaders. We interview a couple members of management, employees, and we also interview HR. And those interviews are structured. I have a 70 questionnaire that I use in my interviews, where I will interview each of those people. And then I will do process reviews, which means I'll look at the company's handbook. I'll look at how things are done. I'll look at recruiting, talent management, and I will look at really what's being done and what's not being done. Then I will summarize those results, and I will make recommendations, and I will typically provide that to the CEO and the leadership team, of course, with HR, assuming that HR is part of the organization. And then leadership, the CEO decides based on the recommendations if they want to do anything about the recommendations. And in my case, I'm not bought into what the CEO does or doesn't do. They can continue to work with me. They can do it themselves. They can go out and hire another consultant. So my job here in assessment is just to do the assessment. And I've done many assessments. And the results of that benchmark have been extremely positive and extraordinary in how CEOs change their minds and their hearts about HR based on the feedback that they get. But don't do this if you don't want to get feedback about your organization, your culture, HR. Don't do it if you're not going to act on it. So that always starts with the CEO. Again, this is just a assessment. I can send you the slide deck too. This is a assessment that is kind of for you to maybe just fill out or have your client fill out, which really asks questions about, hey, does HR have a strong strategic leader? Is HR valued in the company? Is it structured to be strategic, offense, defense? Are there KPIs, et cetera, et cetera? Most of the material I'm discussing today are part of this mini assessment. So think about either a client that you've worked for, or if you've been in HR, or if you've worked with HR in some capacity. and think about whether they are in need of serious repair, if they are doing well, but they need some adjustment, or if they've got a best-in-class HR function. All right, so if you, I don't know if you can do this QR code on Zoom, but if you can't, just go to slido.com on your phone, type in the numbers 1045308, and hopefully it will populate with how you would rate either your HR department or an HR department you have worked with. And as you fill that out, it will populate with the results.
Scott, the QR code doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Can you go to the website?
No, I'm sorry. It works. I was able to use it. So.
Oh, okay.
And you didn't have to, I didn't have to put the code in. It just went right to the poll.
Right.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it
Well, there
worked.
you go. All right. So we've got, and again, this is typical. We've got some average, we've got some needs some serious work, and we have some best in class. But as you can see, the best in class, which is really what I'm going to focus on today, is the lower of the numbers. This is typical when I present to a group of business owners. This is what is shown. And again, my case is that if you want a great company with extraordinary people and extraordinary HR, then you want to be able to raise that 14% up to at least a higher number. So you can see that. Does anybody have any observations or thoughts or questions on this in terms of, what's happening in HR? Because this is probably this is probably the numbers that you would see across large, small, and medium-sized companies, across the country. A lot of average. Anybody have an observation?
I mean, in my experience, my background is a lot in law firms, larger law firms, and very rarely have we had a really good HR person, much less a department. It seems like not as a second thought, but it's like, they promote somebody in there and then they last a year, last 2 years, and rotate out. That's been my experience, fortunately.
Yes. And that keeps lawyers in business with lots of investigations and lots of lawsuits.
Yeah, and in the end, they end up putting a lawyer in charge of HR, but then his numbers drop, so he rotates out, and
yeah. I mean, and it's kind of a sad and it's a concerning issue because the process to get to that best in class is, I mean, it's a lot of work, but just so is every other function in a company, sales, finance. You have to invest. But again, I'm focusing on those 14% of companies that are there, and my steps here are what will get a company there.
And Scott, I'm wondering in part if some of the average ones, that's part of your messaging also, that maybe they aren't average, maybe they are best in class, and people don't recognize what they're doing and understand them, and then opening that door. So not that it's a 50-50, but maybe there are a couple there that are doing a terrific job and have no support.
That's very common, and thank you for that comment, Ed. There's a lot of misunderstanding of, oh, this is HR. Oh, wow. Well, we really are doing some things that are pretty significant. So I don't disagree with you, Ed. Thank you for that comment. All right, so I'm going to move on just to get through some additional material. So I'm going to move on to step 2, which is right people, right seats. And basically, this is based on Jim Collins's work, that if you don't have the right people doing HR, and to the point that was made about people moving in and out of HR, lawyers who are running HR, sometimes CFOs, and are running HR. Sometimes there's no HR. which, you know, again, is common, but I'm going to propose here what kind of Collins alludes to. And again, in the deck, and I'll send you these forms too, so you can see that if you were to complete this form for an HR client that you work with, or a company you did work with, or you're actually inside, the exercise that we do is to put the initials in each one of the boxes of who is doing that function right now. So I'll just quickly go through the boxes. Visionary is usually the strategic people person. And usually that person is the CEO. And that's an area too, which is a big concern. You know, a lot of CEOs think of HR as them. Let's just give that to HR. And usually that's the defensive side. But if they're investing in the offensive side of HR, which we're going to talk more about, then they are the chief people officer. And once a CEO owns that and says, hey, I'm the one that's going to make this happen, the investment in people, then everything else can happen. HR can execute the processes, they can make recommendations to the CEO, and then those processes will have the positive impact. So typically that box is the CEO. The integrator is the HR person who gets things done. So once the visionary says, hey, these are my ideas, this is how I want to invest in people, this is what I want to do, the integrator is the person in HR who would get that done. And then you have all the functional areas below that. Someone's doing recruiting, someone's doing talent management, etc. Now, if you fill this box out for an HR function and it's a smaller company, you might have the same person in every box, or you might have some empty boxes. And that is what it is, because the goal here is just to identify. But if you're building a best practice employee base, you want people in those boxes who are in their, I call it superpower. The person that's doing recruiting right now for an organization needs to be a strategic professional recruiter, and so on and so forth. Again, in a smaller company, you might have a generalist or a business partner who's doing all these functions. But as a company grows, and again, this presentation is geared towards growth companies, companies that want to grow, that want to become greater and greater. That's what this exercise is about. The other invitation is to look at this without any of the boxes filled, without the initials in there, and decide whether or not you know, you would hire or you would put that same person in that box. So, so hopefully that makes sense in terms of an exercise. Anybody have any questions on that?
But Scott, the other possibility for boxes is you could have outside services that you
Yes.
do a box or two in this, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes, and outsourced HR or consultants may be doing one or more of these functions. Although well, I'll talk about, I'm not going to try to give you too many opinions right now. So HR strategic plan is the next step. What we're talking about there is having an HR plan in the business plan of the company. So as I said before, be as intentional about HR as you are any other function. So therefore, the HR plan would need to be taking up as much space as finance or budgets or sales plans and things like that. What typically goes into an HR strategic plan are things like mission, vision, values, the strategies and plans for every function. How are we going to manage recruiting? What do we anticipate? How many new hires are we going to need this year? How are we going to engage employees at a higher level? All the different things we're talking about in this wheel are included in the plan. And just quickly, I believe in values as behaviors, because mission, vision, and values is a nice thing to put on the website. It's a nice placard. It's a nice card. It's a nice banner on the wall. But unless you have specific behaviors that you expect from a company, you're not going to get the type of engagement that we're going to talk about today. So real quick example, you go to a hotel, you check in, you need to use the restroom, you ask the front desk, and they tell you where to go to get to the bathroom. You go down the hallway, you make a right, you make a left, bathrooms are on the left. That's a good thing for a good company. If you want to be an extraordinary company, the behaviors need to be extraordinary. So when you go to a Ritz-Carlton and you check in and you ask the front desk, hey, how do I get to the restroom? What are they going to do? They're going to escort you or have somebody escort you to the restroom. That's a very different behavior. And that's what extraordinary companies do. So the Ritz-Carlton has a set of behaviors for every function in the organization: housekeeping, the restaurant, the front desk. Every part of the Ritz-Carlton has a set of behaviors that are expected from every employee group. And not only do they expect them, but they train managers on how to make sure they're being done. They have meetings, they do communications. And so when you go to any Ritz-Carlton, any place in the world, you're going to see the same thing happen across. Well, the same thing applies to every company. And so if you're in HR, you're consulting in HR, it's an important part of your role to have those behaviors and to write those behaviors and then to expect those behaviors. So I'm just going to ask anybody, does anybody have worked with a company or has worked in a company that has expected behaviors? And just give me an example of one of them. We expect our salesperson or people to do X. Can anybody give me an example of that behavior?
Scott, when I was out of graduate school, I was brought into a management associate program with a company called Hilti Power Tools and Fasteners. They're in the construction industry. And just one that comes to mind is there was an expectation. I started in a frontline sales role before I went into sales management and marketing management. And they expected that we bring a tool in on every sales call. So you would, whether you showed it or not, and of course you didn't force the tool on somebody if the customer wasn't interested, but you had that with you. And that was an example of expected behaviors.
I love that. What tools did they bring?
Oh, so it was all the exciting stuff like hammer drills and
hammer drill, man. I love a good hammer drill.
Powder actuated fasteners. So some
cool.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah. So a lot of so when we do culture building for a client, we will in fact ask them about behaviors. Many times they'll say, well, we don't really have written expected behaviors. So some of the work for building a great company is to try and create those behaviors. Let's see. So let's move on. Oh, so I'm going to show you this quick video. This has to do with HR and the perception, whether you're a 5-employee company, 10, 25, 50, 100, larger. Rob Wittenberger is the CEO of Tyndale. Right now they have about 500 employees. But when Rob started running the company, they had 25 employees. So what Rob decided early on, and he had a Wharton, MBA, was that he was going to bring in a fractional HR person when the company had 25 employees, and that person who is still now there at 500 employees is now the CHRO. But he brought that person in early, and he didn't just bring them in as a defensive HR person. He brought them in as a offensive HR person, actually doing both. And his thought and mindset was, as we grow, because we're going to be a growing company, we want to be an excellent growing company, this would be an important thing to do. So let's just take a look at that. Oops. Sorry.
So when I was getting my MBA, probably the most meaningful true learning that I had was the importance of people in a business. So, a bad strategy with good people, the good people will correct the strategy and make the company successful. A good strategy with bad people, people will not be able to, advance the strategy, and ultimately the company will be unsuccessful. So kind of getting out of school, one of the first things I did was hire a very high-level HR professional, Lynn Kester, who's still with the organization. At the time, we couldn't afford someone full-time. We were a much smaller business, so we had Lynn work, I think it was about 2 days a week as a contractor, and that really set the foundation for HR in this business going forward.
So just again, as I said earlier, the CEOs that understand and invest in HR and are interested in growing and interested in being great companies will in fact invest in HR in a preventative or a offensive minded mode, regardless of the size. If a company plans on just, they're going to stay at 25 employees, they're not planning on any growth, then this process probably isn't for them. The next step I'm going to talk about is establishing KPIs. So every company has KPIs, but a lot of them are built around what are our sales performance indicators, finance in terms of, cost savings, and every function has them. Well, HR has also a pretty sophisticated list of KPIs. So this is a chart of one dashboard that a company uses. Now, I'm not a big fan of this many KPIs, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot. So the most important, in my opinion, and in the best practice companies, is engagement. We're going to talk more about engagement. So there's a KPI in the bottom left for engagement. And then a company, the HR function CEO will decide what are the critical KPIs that we need in HR. So what do we want to know? We want to know what's the cost of hire? What's our turnover rate? What's our productivity like in the company? How much does it cost in absences throughout the company? So all these indicators are given some kind of a score, and it's an easy way to point out where you're having deficiencies and make corrections. But it gives the CEO, the leadership team, some information about how effective their HR services and how employees are behaving. There are many KPI spreadsheets out there. A lot of them are provided through the brokers that you may use. So that could be a payroll company or a benefit broker, but there also are a lot of software, HRIS systems, human resource information that include KPI management. And therefore, as long as you're able to input the data, the software will calculate and will provide the reports that are, again, of value to the CEO and the leadership team and HR. So I'm going to just move on, but this is a general overview of what a KPI looks like. The next step is benchmarking. And what benchmarking is it's looking at other organizations in your industry or of a similar size and looking at what they're doing and what's making them successful. So if there's a company that you admire, if there's a company that is killing it and has a great culture and great people, well, you would hopefully want to know what that company's doing to achieve those results. So I'm going to just give an example of how I've managed to build a library of best practices is through this HR awards program. So if you want to take a look at it, it's hrawards.org. But there are many ways, by the way, to collect best practices. So a lot of it is by going to HR associations like SHRM, which is the Society for HR Management. There are other higher level HR groups, by reading Harvard Business Review, by CEO peer groups who are doing innovative things. So in our program, we basically have an application process every year We probably get 20 or 30 applications. Those come from small, medium, large companies. And basically, they provide their best practices. We give awards out, but more important is the sharing of best practices. And so a company that is part of this program is able to get best practices from 30 other companies. And we make it very easy for a company to go to another company. We'll make the introduction and we'll say, hey, we'd like you to meet Joe, who's looking for some best practices. And all of the participants in this program are very willing to share. Now, you probably wouldn't get this information from a direct competitor, but you would get it from many, many other sources. So benchmarking, again, is a very important way to help create extraordinary people, and it's not costly, because really you're just getting information from other companies. So it's a very cost-effective way of building best practice in the organization. Any questions so far? Is this making sense so far? Yeah, a couple nodding of heads. All right, let's move to the last step, which is best practice by function. So we're going to go through each function within HR, and I'm going to give you some best practices and some thoughts on what strategic recruiting looks like, and what does strategic talent management engagement look like, and so on and so forth. So let's start with recruiting. Recruiting is one of the more undervalued functions within a company. Usually most companies that are in that average category will use an admin to do recruiting. And what I mean by an admin is they're going to have somebody who knows how to post and pray. That's an expression that says, I'm going to put a job up on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put it on Indeed, and then I'm going to pray that I get responses. So that's the role of an admin. They'll also screen candidates. They'll present candidates to the hiring manager. They'll do all the important administrative duties. What I'm talking about here is in great companies, recruiting is strategic. And what I mean by that is that a recruiter or recruiters in strategic or best practice companies put a professional in recruiting, or they have a professional do it. And instead of the ways that I just described, a recruiting admin, these recruiters are partnering with hiring managers. They're not just giving info. They're sitting down with the hiring manager and they're talking to the hiring manager about, hey, let's come up with a strategy to find these people. They're strategic and offensive with candidates. So they're not just, doing a 5-minute screen with candidates. They're really understanding the background. They're using assessments to find out if these candidates are the right fit. And also, recruiting is like the first exposure that most candidates have with a company. It's the first chance that you have to make an impression on a candidate that this is a company that you work for, that you want to work for. If a candidate has a bad first experience, not only are they going to probably not be interested in working for your company, but they're also going to tell their family and friends, and then you're going to lose potential candidates. So it's really important to have that first impression be a professional impression. Recruiting is seen as a sales and marketing function in best practice companies. And what I mean by that, selling, good listening skills, good question asking, good influence skills, having the ability to match a candidate with a hiring manager and influence both to recognize why it's a good fit. And so they work with marketing professional recruiters to figure out what the branding is for the company and how we're going to present ourselves to candidates. So they use recruiting technology effectively. They have an applicant tracking system. They know how to use it. And very importantly is they know how to build a network or a pipeline of candidates for the company. So they go to association meetings. They develop a following. They will do job fairs and manage them. These are all professional skills. They're not admin skills. And most average companies do recruiting as an admin function. And so the goal here, if you're a consultant or you're working in HR or you're a CEO, is to recognize this as an important part of building a great company. The second and probably most significant is talent management. And when people use the word talent management, which is a buzzword to me, that they don't even know what you're talking about. In our research, I've broken talent management down into several categories, which I'm going to touch on. Probably the most important is engagement and company culture, but all the steps below it, management, employee relations, communication, special interest groups, training, etc., are all part of talent management. And if these are done by and invested in by the CEO, this will have a great impact on building a great company. So let's just start with engagement and company culture. So culture is often misunderstood in companies. Jess, can I have about 10 or 15 minutes to finish?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. So the CEO owns culture. If the CEO doesn't believe in corporate culture and doesn't see it as an important thing, but I'm going to show you a quick video from David Friedman about the importance of culture. If the CEO doesn't create corporate culture and utilize HR to nurture it and to grow it, it will be created for the CEO and the company, and not in a good way. So what will happen is if the CEO does not nurture culture, the most toxic, the most negative, the loudest voices will end up becoming the culture of the company, because that's just the natural way of things if it's not being done intentionally. So what will happen is employees will coalesce around these loud voices, and that will become your culture. And that's probably not something that you want to do. So what do you do about it? How do you create culture? So one of the ways to create culture is through engagement. And if you can see my example of a human being or an employee, this is total engagement, right? You've got the whole person coming into work every day. They're giving you extraordinary productivity. They're all in. They love working for your company. That's full engagement. The problem is that most average companies have this level of engagement, which means that they come into work, they'll do the job, they'll do the best they can, but they're really interested in getting out at 5 o'clock. And they're also interested in looking for another job because, this place sucks. And that's not a recipe for building a great company. You want full engagement. And that would make sense from a financial point of view, because if you have full engagement, you have full productivity, and you multiply that by the number of employees in your company, you're going to get increased productivity, which is going to lead to profit. It's kind of a simple case, and it's a wonder to me why more CEOs and leaders don't understand that, and they're not interested in investing that way. If you have answers to that question, I'd love to hear it. But the work that we do and some of you do is to help leaders understand the importance of this. So what's an engagement survey? A survey is done typically by lots of different companies that offer them. Gallup is one of them, but there are many companies. We do engagement surveys. And basically, it's a questionnaire that gets completed by everyone in the company. And then as a result of that, you get an engagement score once that's completed. So you usually start out with a benchmark, you do an engagement survey, a net promoter score, which is a measure of engagement, might come out at 30%. And the goal is to get to 80 or 90. So what you'll see as the leaders is you'll see, wow, we have a pretty big gap. I thought things were pretty good around here. They're not. So then the decision is to do that survey every year, but also to do the activities that we're talking about here today, which will increase that engagement. You'll have less turnover, you'll have higher productivity, which will lead to profits. I'm going to show you a quick video here by David Friedman. He's a business colleague. He specializes only in building corporate culture, and he's going to talk a little bit about the importance.
The culture in any group of people has an enormous influence over every single thing that goes on. And so you could take the same group of people, and if you put them in different cultures, those same people will perform differently. So if you think about a company and an HR function, you could take the same people with the same talent, the same skills, the same knowledge, the same experience, and if you put them into 3 different organizations that had 3 different cultures, those same people would perform differently, because the culture influences in a profound way how people show up and do what they do. If you understand and agree, and nearly everyone does, that your culture is one of your biggest competitive advantages, that it's one of the most important things you can do in your company, then I would suggest that you ought to be as systematic in seeing your culture as a core business process. You should be as systematic about that as you are about your sales, finances, and operations and other parts of your company. If it's really a driver of success, as almost anybody would tell you it is, then why wouldn't you see that as one of your most critical core business processes in your company?
So again, that's David talking about culture. I have like this, my Myers-Briggs score, I have a high N, for those of you who know that, intuition. I'm pretty good at walking into a company, into their headquarters or whatever, and almost without doing anything, understand what the culture's like there. I can see a really positive culture. People are chatting with each other, they're smiling, they'll say hello to you. There's just a vibe. When I walk into a toxic culture, I can tell that also. Everybody's sitting at their desk. Nobody's talking to anybody else. There's no smiling. There's no saying hi. Everybody's serious. That is, and again, this is not scientific, right? But I've been pretty accurate at being able to tell the difference between a positive corporate culture and not so. Let me move on to management employee relations. So again, another buzzword, but basically, this is establishing an HR function that can be trusted, that can be respected, and that can maintain confidentiality. And so a lot of average HR functions within average companies, or we can even call them good companies, don't have that in their HR, because they have a defensive HR function, which is mostly administrative. And so an employee or a manager is kind of stuck, because if they have a big problem with an employee or there's a harassment complaint, they don't have an outlet that they can go to sit down and say, hey, this is a problem, and I need your advice on how to deal with it. So it's very important in an offensive-minded professional HR function to have high emotional intelligence, have strong interpersonal skills, so that somebody, let's say an employee has a harassment with their issue with their boss, they're not going to talk to their boss. And if they go to leadership, they're going to be in fear of, being a whistleblower. You go to HR in a professional company, they're going to handle that positively. They're going to do an investigation. They're going to protect that employee. And those are very critical behaviors so that employees trust the company. So employee relations, management relations is a significant part of increasing engagement. Next, I'm going to talk about communications, another way to increase engagement. Employees need to hear from and interact with the CEO and the leaders regularly. There needs to be honesty and transparency coming from the CEOs and coming from the leadership team. This can be done in many ways. You've probably been part of this: small groups, large groups, chats, breakfasts. This can be done live and virtually. But the more communications back and forth in the company and the more transparent, the higher the level of trust and respect, the higher level of engagement. And if they ask you, a leader says, what do you think, or how do you think we should do this? Again, that's going to increase engagement. So communications, two-way street, many mechanisms, and HR again would execute a strong communications program in the company to be able to help the CEO have that kind of, and the leaders to have that kind of communication process with their employees. Again, average companies, not so strong in this area. Extraordinary companies, very strong. Another way to increase engagement is succession planning. And succession planning is not just for the CEO. Succession planning is for everyone in the organization. Succession planning, if it's done well and it's done with the system, identifies gaps in employees that, hey, we love this employee, we want to get them to the next level, but they're just not quite there yet. So that's identified, and then whatever is done to hopefully train and develop that person to get where they're needed. This ensures the future of the company, which obviously is very important. There are lots of tools out there, again, for succession planning, and again, has a big impact on engagement because employees are being paid attention to, and they know they have a career path in the organization. So that's succession planning. Performance evaluation is also an important way to increase engagement. There are many systems and ways of doing it, quarterly, annually. What I'll just say about performance evaluation, in average companies, managers and leaders are not coached very well. And so therefore, employees feel that performance evaluation is something to be feared, and it's something to be concerned about, rather than, oh, this is an opportunity to sit down with my boss. What am I doing well? What do I need to learn better? But if a manager's not trained to do that, if they haven't had coaching or training in how to be that type of person, then that's not going to happen. That's going to certainly decrease engagement in the company. So again, I'm not going to go into all these tools, but talent management has a number of tools. If again, if the CEO invests and believes and gives HR the opportunity to create these processes, engagement's going to shoot up significantly. Another key component in HR excellence is technology. Many companies have what they call HRIS systems, or human resource information systems. You've heard of SAP and Workday, UKG, but there are also systems for smaller companies too. And they're often provided by the benefit broker or the payroll company. They're usually included with the package. In average good companies, most HR people don't utilize those options to create KPIs, and they have an applicant tracking system, and they have engagement surveys. They're all embedded in whatever software you use. So technology is a big impact tool for employee productivity and engagement and CEO results. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to talk about compliance. What I just want to say about compliance is that there's a complicated set of laws and regulations in compliance. We all know this. The goal here is to prevent versus react. So a average good company, you're going to see more investigations, you're going to see more claims, you're going to see more EEOC. The goal in extraordinary company is to reduce that. And in many, many extraordinary companies, I ask them what kind of complaints that you have. They'll say 0, maybe 1, because they have a preventative approach to compliance. So, and HR plays a critical role here. So HR can go to the CEO and say, hey, here's the reg about harassment. Here's what the government is saying needs to be done. Then the CEO and the HR person can look at it and say, okay, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And so hopefully we'll have a harassment process. So if an employee goes to HR with a complaint, there's an investigation done, it's thorough, the employee trusts that it's being handled professionally, and that will go a long way to avoiding expensive legal issues. Total rewards, compensation and benefit strategy, wellness. I'm not just talking about like an admin process with comp and benefits. I'm talking about thinking about compensation as how do we establish and maintain internal equity? How do we know that employees are being paid similarly for the same jobs? And how are we with external competitiveness? So how do we stack up against people that are companies that are doing the same kinds of things we are? Wellness is fast becoming a big issue in organizations, significant impact on engagement. The way that happens is through health screenings, where benefit brokers will often send someone on site to do those health screenings. They can also be done through, offering gym memberships and providing other healthcare services. One of the biggest and fastest growing areas in wellness is mental health, mental wellness. Great companies have outlets for that. They offer an EAP, which is called an employee assistance program. Sometimes HR can be that resource. Sometimes they need to get referred to a therapist. Very, very important to be involved in offering those types of services to be extraordinary. And then finally, I'll just talk about HR admin and then wrap up. Again, benefit brokers, payroll services, admin is critical. I'm not discounting or downplaying admin. It's very important. It has to be there. Defense. It needs to be there. And again, there are many providers that can help you with that. The point I will just make is that if you, and Dave Ulrich writes about this in his book, HR Champions, he says, if you don't get my paycheck right, or you don't handle my benefit claim right, you can forget about all these other talent management activities. I don't really care. If you can't get my payroll, you can't get my paycheck right, I'm not trusting you on anything else. So very, very important that these services are handled. And then finally, diversity. What I'll just say about diversity is it's the new buzzword. Everybody's doing diversity training. Big companies are hiring diversity officers. A lot of this is in relation to the kinds of social, geopolitical things that have happened. My thought, or the best practice thought on diversity, is that we want a company that reflects our customer base. So if our customer base is diverse and we're not, that's a problem. And that can affect company results. It affects profitability. So it's not just important to check off the box. It's important for a business reason. And so again, HR can play a significant role in helping the company understand that. So there you have it. Those are the 6 steps. They're synergistic. So if you follow them in order, starting with assessment up to each function, and you do them with the support of your CEO, then you will have an extraordinary company, which will lead to extraordinary people, extraordinary productivity, and will make the case for an increase in profits for the company. It can't not. If this is done, it has to have an impact on profitability. And my goal is to try and educate leaders to understand that and to have a change of heart and mind so that they understand by the investment in this. And we're getting there. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. It's not there yet. So just a brief background on my company. I place HR people in direct hire, contract, and fractional. I work with small companies as small as 10 employees up to 10,000 employees. And then I also consult on this process. So a company that's interested in turning HR into a profit center, I can help them do that through following these steps. So with that, I am going to end my presentation. I thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments or feedback. The book will be out hopefully in a month. If anybody's interested, probably find it on Amazon. Yeah, so any thoughts, questions, feedback?
I thought it was great. And actually, I was pleased to see your trust and respect, because the last company I was in, the company culture was trust and respect. And the behavior, back to your behavior part, was treat others, whether it was a vendor, a client, a agent, whatever, the same way you wanted to be treated. And that was like one of the behavioral rules, like if you could just think that way. But that was, and the reason I went to that company is the CEO let us create, he drove it, and I had an awesome HR, proactive strategic HR department. But you're also right about the paycheck. You know, payroll has to be 100%. People do not want you to mess with your pay, and you got to start that as a big priority, you know. So it goes from everything from the technical, but you know, having a strategic HR department, they'll be at the table and they will increase profits.
Thank you, Georgianne.
So,
Thank you for the feedback. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Scott, I was writing a comment, but since we're near the end and I may not get it in time.
Go ahead.
Great presentation, as others have said, but I would also say a lot of what you said could be applied to many areas, or maybe even all areas of the company. But I'm thinking of things like I managed HVAC for Merck for a while. I mean, talk about a function that is only noticed when something goes wrong. And I have a favorite memory. I had an executive director call me over when I was a young manager, and he said, the temperature here is terrible. You guys have to fix it. And I said, well, as I walked to your office, somebody told me it was the best it's ever been. Somebody else said it was too cold, and somebody else said it was too hot. So what temperature would you like? So I don't know how to answer that. And I said, neither do I.
Yeah.
So I think about that. I think about operations and maintenance and IT and functions like that. Every one of those is critical. And
Yeah.
many of them are kind of in that invisible or only hated if something goes wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. That's so pertinent and important. And like, look, just like you said, HVAC is it's not black and white, right? There's gray to it, just like HR. You know, it's not black and white. It's not and you know, like I run into a lot of CEOs who want to believe in HR, but their mind is logical, rational. They don't have the emotional intelligence or the interpersonal skills to understand the importance of people. This is not a judgment. However, if the CEO says, look, I want this to be the case, I need help, you can do that. You can find an executive coach for the CEO. You can help them through different business owner groups that can help them. You know, there's a lot of ways to help CEOs change hearts and minds. And part of my presentation to HR groups is that if you can influence your leaders and CEO by explaining this process to them, you have a good chance of getting them to jump on board.